Hey everybody, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week we don't just have a special guest, we have an extra special guest. He was my first roommate in college, along with my other friend who is guest number 5, Alex Rice, on this show, and he is also a great and amazing friend. And we've kept in touch over the years. We had a couple gaps of a few years, but we've always, kept in contact. And I'm so excited to finally have him on the podcast. So with no further delays, everyone, please welcome Marshall Roupp to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
I'm glad to have us all reunited in the Coffin Talk space.
Seriously, no, it's so fun. And I didn't read your bio, so I'll just kind of go over it now because I would rather personally introduce you when I know you well, but you wrote into the show and told us you are a teacher, performer, and family member, and you've been teaching special education and working in mental health for over 20 years now. You've also been on stage in multiple comedy shows. When I met you, that was more of your career. And you're now, this is my favorite part, the proud father of a 3-year-old girl who makes you happy to be alive. So we are both the fathers of 3-year-old girls. Let's start there. What's that like?
It's wild. It's wild. Hard, like they said it would be, but not that you can understand what it's going to be like when they tell you it's going to be like a certain way. And, but it's constantly bringing up new things, new ways of looking at things, new perspectives on the experience. And yeah, it's challenging, but I think that I got lucky in that I've got a fantastic partner who has been helping me to raise her for these 3 years. And yeah, just, I also got lucky because I don't know, I feel like I got an easy kid too. I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah.
She sleeps well, she eats well, the simple things. She does it well.
I'm in the same club, and I always feel weird because people are like, I look them dead in the eye and I say, look, I feel lucky. I have one of the ones that doesn't cry a lot. And she came out of the box. It's not really, yeah. And your wife.
Yeah, people grumble, and then you go like, yeah, it's pretty great though. Yeah. Pretty universally though, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's good that you mentioned your wife not helping, but because I think that's another thing that I think a lot of parents, you can't tell them is you don't know how you and your spouse or whoever it is that you're raising a kid with are going to cooperate or not cooperate and how you're going to see. So that's also interesting because I think 3 years in, you are qualified to say that, that you guys are working together. And because I've had both experiences. I've had a really good relationship with someone with a kid, and I've had a horrible one that didn't work out.
Yeah.
But back to you, because this show is about you, Marshall. I usually ask everyone, how old are you? But you're the same age as me. You're what, 43, 44?
Yeah, turning 44. No, turned 44 in August.
Yeah. Are you August, 6th or 5th?
5th, yeah. Autumn's the 6th.
I know. I knew I should have said 5th first. I'm so annoyed. That's okay. It's like my mom on the 4th, and then you, and then autumn. That's
right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so I've covered how old you are, and then I always ask people, what generation, if any, do you think you're a member of? Since I know you very well, and we're the same age, I'd rather ask you, what is your opinion as someone who's worked in education, because that's a field specific to age, of generations, and just the use of that term and the fact that we divide and have these things. What is your opinion of generations?
They're kind of helpful in talking about things in the aggregate, I'd say. And you can kind of follow trends through time, but also I wouldn't expect anybody from any particular generation to fit into a particular box just because they were born on a specific year.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good answer. I like that. And I think I pretty much agree. It's also just kind of fun for me to meet people and try to figure out where I am in the generational divide in their eyes too. So that's always, as I get older, especially, it's weird when people project what generation you're in to you.
It's also weird to have the experience, which I have all the time as a teacher, of oh yeah, I understand what's going on. I hear you. Wait, what? What is going on? I do not understand a single thing that is, oh wait, I got really old. And that's why I don't understand this, because it's not for me anymore.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but it's not for me anymore.
Yeah, you can tell if you're watching the wrong show or something on TV because the ads don't apply to you. You're like, wait, what?
Who do you think I am right now?
Yeah. My favorite thing, I run at a gym a couple days a week, and it's the most boring thing in the world. I cannot stand it. And so to keep myself entertained, I can't do it with like the TV screen in front of me because it just like I'll go too slow. I'll just start not running hard enough. But I love watching what other people are watching because it's like they only have 7 channels and they have like 2 sports channels and Fox News and CNN. And my favorite thing is to watch baby boomers and if they're watching CNN or Fox News because they always watch one of the two, and I'm just like watching and I can mention this for our audience because it'll be funny because they'll hear this after the fact. Today is election day in America.
Sure is.
The final question I have just for general background for our audience to hear, this one I was saving because I actually think it's really interesting. Like me, you've moved a lot. Like we're both people who really have moved a lot. So in chronological order, can you tell us which cities and states you've lived in your life, if it's quick enough to do that? But what I want to do is please repeat when you've moved back to places because I always find that interesting.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so Athens, Pennsylvania is where I started my life and lived for the first 19 years, which is a small town in northern Pennsylvania.
And I'm going to interrupt you. It's a small town in North.
It's like super tiny. It's like less than 2,000 people.
Wow.
Total population of the town. Now there's lots of like other small towns that are like right up against it. So you can move from one to the other one without necessarily knowing that you're going in between. But the cultures are definitely different. And like, if you live there, you know, like, oh, that's over there. And, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Waverly. Oh, I'm not going to go across state lines to do that. Like,
Waverly.
So yeah, Athens. Yeah, Waverly. Oh man, Waverly. We could go on for a while.
Reminds me of like the Simpsons when they hate Shelbyville.
Shelbyville, very much. Yeah. So Athens, Pennsylvania is where I grew up. Then I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I met you and Alex and many other fine people who have been on this podcast. Lived there while I was going to school, plus an extra like year or so. I moved to Pittsburgh because growing up in Athens, about the time that I became a conscious adulting or trending towards adult person, I was like, man, I just hate it here all the time, and didn't necessarily have a name for what I was feeling. But then there was a school trip to New York City, and which is the closest big city, about 6 hours away or so. And I went and I literally like stepped off the bus into the like smelly garbage pails like ridden sidewalk and took a deep breath and looked around and was like, home. This feels great. I just love that feeling of the city. And so I moved to Pittsburgh being like, I'll move to a city. I didn't want to move to like New York. I felt like that was too big of a jump. And really liked the campus and whatnot at Pitt. So went there. After 4.5 years, was like, neat that this is called a city, technically a city on paper. I understand, has big city problems and all that, but it didn't feel like a city like New York felt to me. So went out to Chicago, also had, I'm sure we'll discuss lifelong interest in comedy and whatnot. And so I moved out to Chicago because I was interested in going to some of the theater training schools here in town. And that was when I was like, yeah, this is the right kind of place. It took me a while to find the right job, but it did feel like the right, context for me to start building my life. I lived there from 2003 until I think 2013 or something like that, long enough that people who were actually from Chicago would be like, you can say you're from Chicago now. That's okay. We're okay with it. Like, we'll claim you.
That's cool because that's how I started to view you, because I visited you 3 times I think there, and yeah, it was just like, I have a friend who lives in Chicago, not who's like kind of there.
It was really interesting. Like Pittsburgh to Chicago was like kind of a good shift. Like Pittsburgh's a good starter city for Chicago because they have a lot of similar characteristics.
I agree.
I will always remember driving away when I was driving my moving truck from Pittsburgh to Chicago. I was listening to the local NPR station as I drove out of Pittsburgh, and they said, we did a national study and found that Pittsburgh is the second most segregated city in America. And I was like, look at me, so like budding progressive, moving away from the second most segregated city in America. And they immediately said, the first most segregated city is Chicago.
Oh my God.
Oh no. Oh no, that's saying the wrong thing about me that I want to say about me.
That's funny because I'm from, like, not from, but, you know, I've lived more than 10 years in Oakland proper, California, and that's the most like diverse city in America. So it's like hilarious because I went from there to Pittsburgh and I was like, whoa, I've never seen this before. There's a district where one race lives. Like, what, you know, and if anyone's listening to this and you don't know my personality, I'm not saying this with, nor is Marshall, with like glee. And
no, I bring it up because it's so like against how I want to live my life. Yeah. And like, in that moment, I had a brief moment of like, oh no, this is not fitting that narrative that I have for myself.
And then you went to a really diverse place.
So I forgot I was talking about where I live. So yeah, Chicago, lived there for 10 years. I met the woman who became my wife, and then 2 weeks after we got married, we moved to Charleston, South Carolina, which is kind of like diet South Carolina was how I described it, because you have all the things that are like kind of associated with South Carolina, but it's like the most liberal place in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. But even saying that, like,
I mean,
just the moment that we moved down there, I mean, like, it was still like, yes, I don't know, I could make, I don't have a good metaphor for that other than, you know, it was just like all the things that people would say to you that they wouldn't necessarily know they were telling on themselves, but, you know, they were telling on themselves that they had really entrenched racist beliefs that weren't even being examined at all. And I moved down there and taught middle school for 3 years, and learned that middle school is not the right age range for my teaching skill set. People, man, they just do it, but I don't even know. They're like shiny, happy people that have like a whole different outlook on life than I'm able to achieve. But I did it for 3 years and then didn't work the fourth year in teaching down there. My wife was going to school. She found a really interesting school down there in Charleston that taught historical building trades and learned how to blacksmith, which was really a fascinating experience. But, you know, as we got to the end of her schooling, we discussed, you know, where it felt like home to us, and we discussed pretty much the entirety of the United States. We're both down. She was from the West Coast. I was from, you know, small town Pennsylvania. So we kind of discussed all the different regions, all the different cities, because we knew we wanted to be in a city, and decided that Chicago was the place that felt the most like home. We still had a lot of people who we had collected in our social circle, our chosen family circle in Chicago. And so it felt like the right place, because we were planning on going back and, you know, getting reestablished and then starting our family. And so that seemed like the right place to go. So we moved back in 2018 or something like that, maybe even earlier.
Yeah, so you do plan on staying there. You're going to raise your daughter. And
That's the idea. I mean, life always sends you things that you have to manage that, you know, lead you to make decisions that you don't consider that you would ever make. But, you know, as far as a plan goes, I'm where I want to be.
And speaking of which, because I asked you ahead of time about this, that is a great segue into exactly the question I wanted to ask you, which is, you got like very scary and then really awesome version of a diagnosis. Yeah. So that's my like clumsy segue from that. So why don't we just talk like a little about that? Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to MikeyOpp.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MikeyOpp.com. Thanks.
That would have been in 2010, in the summer, I started to have some experiences where I was losing sensation in my fingertips, so I could like hold on to a glass of water or something like that, and I wouldn't feel it. I like wouldn't know how much pressure I was putting on it. It didn't ever get to the point where I couldn't hold things or anything like that, but I was experiencing that on my palms, on my fingertips, and then in my feet too, like on the soles of my feet, and ended up going to a series of doctors, and they're like, "Oh, we got to send you for an MRI." And then the diagnosis came back actually on my 30th
Oh
birthday,
my gosh.
driving back to Chicago from a family like gathering in Pennsylvania,
Wow.
driving solo on
Oh,
Route
what?
8090. I was maybe like two hours outside of
Oh,
Chicago. It was a Sunday,
that's
and my doctor called
brutal.
me, and I was like, "Oh no!"
Oh
Like
my
the
god.
doctor's office shouldn't be calling me on Sunday. Like
Oh
that's a really
no.
bad time. They're usually golfing, you know. So I was like literally driving down the highway, and I was told, and like my response to stressful information like that, like I can't take it all in at once, so I like acknowledge that I got it, and like talk with the person. My doctor was like, "We're going to see you through it, and don't worry, there's lots of treatments that weren't available before," and blah blah blah. And so I like talked with 5 minutes. I mean, how old did I even really know my doctor? I wasn't getting consoled
Yeah. Wow.
by him. And so I hung up the phone with him, and then just spent the next couple of hours taking it in. I was still having some symptoms. I'd also lost a field of my vision. I forgot about that. I'd also lost a field of my vision, which is what caused the test to happen. I like couldn't see in one particular like section of my vision,
Mhm.
and they thought it was like something pressing against. Anyway, it turned out to be MS. Surprise! Yeah, that had happened like 5 years earlier. It hadn't gotten caught.
And my experience with hearing MS is like, oh my gosh, this person is going to rapidly decline and like go to the wayside.
Oh yeah, mine too.
So like hearing that you had it was like devastating and scary to me, and I didn't even know how to like deal with it. So I'm so glad that you're telling the story now from here, because it would have been such a different interview. So just that was my little interjection for our people listening.
Yeah, it was scary. I mean, and then like it was a while before I got put on medication, and the medication when I first started out was an injectable medication, so I had to be giving myself injections every other day, and try to remember to do something every other day, not every even day. That would be easy. Not every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, or not every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That would be easy. No, every other day. So every week it's different. Every month it's different. Anyway, it was a mess. Thankfully, they
Yeah.
they had other medications that are oral medications. So now I just take a pill every morning, and I haven't had a relapse since I was down in South Carolina. And I think most of that relapse was exacerbated by the loss of my mom and the stress that I was feeling around
Mm.
that, and like the stress of being in South Carolina, where I never had people down there, who were like, "Oh, let's go hang out and do
Yeah.
anything." Like it was kind of like at an awkward spot in my life where I'd just gotten married and my wife was involved in something, but everybody who was involved with that was like younger than we were, because they were like just going into their first college experience. She was having her second postgraduate or undergraduate experience, and so I never really found people down there. So I think that all played a role, and but thankfully since then, thanks to various medications, I've not had anything worse. And like my symptoms, usually with MS, like things progressively get worse. I've had it for
Mhm.
let's see, 14 years now, and other than having that relapse where like things got worse, but then they got better, I'm cruising. I'm cruising.
That's so cool. Like, seriously, I mean, I cannot possibly express. I know I've talked to you enough. Like, I know that my enthusiasm and joy for you is like present to you, but I just like, even hearing you retell the story for like probably the third or fourth time, it is like captivating, and just like, always have hope, whoever you are listening to this. Like, it does not matter, like, no matter what a doctor or anyone tells you in any situation, there are outliers, and there's also just luck. And I think this is the appropriate time to ask the only other question we ask every guest on this podcast, which is, what do you think happens when you die? And then obviously I'd like you to tell me if that came up at all when this diagnosis came up, like your opinion of what's going to happen when you die, because obviously it made you think about death.
No idea what happens when you die. I have no idea.
Nice.
I have no idea.
Good answer.
I don't think anybody really can know. I think I think that it would, I know that there's lots of stories out there, and possibly even on this very podcast, about the experience of coming back after something like that. I look at that as like, oh, that's really interesting information, but I don't think it's necessarily like that's a person's brain interpreting an experience that it had. Like, I look back on experiences that my brain told me made sense, 10, 20 years ago. And I'm like, wow, I understand that very, very differently now. And so something as huge as death is like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happens. I don't know if there's really a way to happen, but I also understand why human beings, probably from the very beginning, have been trying to say, well, here you go. Here, it's really important to know. And here's what it is. And there's, that's come through in different guises through history, through religion, through politics, through culture. And I think that they're all just different interpretations of whatever this is. Now, to say that I don't know doesn't mean that I don't think that there isn't something beyond our human consciousness that exists in the universe that we just don't. I don't know if we're like designed to understand it. I don't know. I've had like weird experiences in my life.
Tell me one of those.
Sure. The first one happened, I don't know, it was like 13 or something like that. I went when I was raised Lutheran, and I would hang out with the youth group periodically whenever there was a youth group doing things, because small town, really boring things to do. That's always a good thing to have. And one time, a friend of mine and we went on a kayaking trip where we all went out on this big lake, and there were, several different kayaks of two different people, but it was like several different interconnected waterways. And you could kind of get there from a big common lake, but you couldn't see, like once people dispersed, you couldn't see, you couldn't hear anything. And my friend and I had like paddled around a little bit. We went back, we sat in the canoe just on the water. And all of a sudden I got like an intense feeling that we needed to go and find the youth group leader, who's like a pastor in training kind of guy. It was like, we need to go. And it was like one of those things where I was like, that's so weird. Like, the brain does weird things. You're 14, so you're like, am I clairvoyant? I'm not clairvoyant. That's just a thing that they make up, right? But am I clairvoyant? Yeah. And my friend, who was sitting in front of me in the canoe, turns around it with like a kind of like important, like, he turned with purpose. And he looked at me and he goes, did you just get the craziest feeling that we have to go check on Vicar Chris?
Whoa.
And I went,
wow.
Yes. And we had seen them around, but we hadn't seen where they went. but we paddled directly to where they were, and their canoe had overturned. They were okay. They were making their
Wow.
way to the side, but
Hmm.
that's what had happened. You better believe it showed up in the sermon the next week. Like that was a wild experience, and I don't know what that is. I mean, like maybe it's
Hmm.
nothing. Maybe it's just correlation. Something happened there, but it
Hmm.
seems really intense, and it does seem like that there's like something going on with frequencies or something that happened. This electromagnetic, I don't know what,
Hmm.
that goes out into the universe that we pick up on as human individuals, that is somehow connecting beyond what we understand as consciousness. But it doesn't mean that we
Hmm.
can understand what happens, or it doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't think that it necessarily means that we can understand what that is.
Yeah. You phrased it so specifically, and I love the way you phrased it. You said, I don't think we were designed to like, and so it's interesting because that implies that there is a design, which I'm not disagreeing with. I'm just saying like that simple phrasing had so much in it. Also, it's very like tolerant to what plagues my life, which is I want to know. I want to know. Like I just like I do want to know if this was designed, and I want to know the design more than if it was designed. Like more than anything,
Right.
I want like someone to show me the top of the board that the game came in that has the rules because I'm just confused. And like speaking of election day, elections confuse me a lot when I think of like the rules for being a good human, because in our country, two people constantly telling you this other side is evil, this one is right, or some version of that. I mean, I'm being a little dramatic,
Yeah.
and that in itself is confusing. Like, how can we have such different ideologies? Like, not just the East and the West, because that's such a gross oversimplification, but there's so many nuanced, versions. Tying all this in, when you met your now wife, was that like a spiritual experience for you? Maybe not like the very first time you met, but like the knowledge that like, oh, this woman and I are gonna like get together and procreate.
Yeah. I think that what like really showed me that we were a compatible couple is that we were able to process conflict between us effectively.
Hmm.
And like
Cool.
she also showed me that not everyone out there in the world will say, oh no, or let me make sure that I'm phrasing this correctly. There's lots of people out there in the world who, when you're in a relationship, will tell you, okay, we've resolved this conflict and I feel that it is resolved, or we're okay now, or something like that. And then the next time you find yourselves in similar stress, like they're being like, oh, well, remember this litany of things that have happened, that I'm like, you're reproving to me whatever this negative thing that I had before was. And you're like, wait, I thought we were good. I thought we were good. And you said we were good. And she was the first person that I've ever, and the only person that I've ever like been in a relationship with, who has told me like this is resolved, and then it's resolved. Like it doesn't come back around.
Ah, that's cool.
We're able to be honest with each other and be like, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is, or like when we find ourselves at each other, we're really good at like being able to be like, we aren't normally at each other. So what is going on here?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
what are the things that are going on in our lives other than this that are influencing this? And then like, is that what's really the
Yeah.
problem? Is there something going on in our process that's the problem here? Like we're really good at slowing down and just being like, wait, I'm not angry at you. Why am I being angry at you? And figuring those things out. Yeah, it's amazing. It's highly recommended.
I totally agree, and I think it's funny because I just was in. I was dying to get married and have a family, and I definitely rushed a few of the steps in my first marriage. And even though we did get married, and even though we were together for I think over 7 years, and we had a kid together and raised him until he was about 2 together, it like didn't feel like what you just described. And that's the only advice I give to young people is I say there's no age to marry, there's no age to have kids, but like you gotta know. And if you even have to ask, it's the answer is no. Like that's the only advice I can give young people.
Yes.
If there's any hesitation,
Yeah.
no, don't marry this person.
Yeah.
Just don't.
And like talk
Um,
about it all up front. That's my other thing.
yeah,
I don't know.
Oh
There's
God, yeah.
I forget what the website is, but like questions that couples should ask before they get married. I think there's like 7 big ones that they have up there. They're good. Like cover it all. Figure out how you feel about,
Yeah.
conflict, or about how you're raising kids. Like even if you like, that was, something that's come up between my wife and I, as we agreed that we wanted to have kids before we got married, but now we're like raising the kid, and we didn't talk through like systems of discipline, and like right now it's pretty easy. It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
don't touch that sharp thing,
Yeah.
stop putting the choking thing in your mouth, like those are some basic level expectations and limits that we know to set them up, but things will get complicated.
Yeah. We're in the like when she can have sugar, how much
Yeah,
sugar, and
yeah,
what sugar does
yeah,
to her is the current like tete-a-tete in my family. Especially with
yeah. Talk
Halloween.
about things that are unknowable.
Oh man, Marshall, this has been an amazing interview. I schedule these for a certain time, and it's because audiences lose retention. But we will obviously keep in touch, and it's always good to talk to you. Would you like to add anything before we go? Is there anything you want to tell our audience?
This was a joy. Go out, live life. Don't let people fit you into boxes, because boxes aren't real. People are real, and so invest in those relationships.
Oh, wow. I love it. I love it, love it, love it. Thank you again, Marshall Roupp, everyone. He's an amazing person. We didn't even get to talk about his acting and comedy careers, and I say it plural because he's done it in 2 cities and all that. But the point is, he's awesome, and he's a great friend, and this show is all about me collecting friendships and recording them eternally for myself. So thank you again, Marshall, for coming on the show. Everyone else, please head over to MikeyOpp.com. That's MikeyOpp.com, and sign up for the free once a week essays that I write, which also announce the podcast, and it's part of the Mikey Opp empire, which is the only empire that's not trying to take over the world. We're just trying to exist. So let us exist. Yay. All right. Thank you again. My name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.
Bye, everybody.